Alright, race fans, welcome to another edition of the Workbench. Today we're going to take a look at disassembly and assembly of a Tyco 440 wide pan. Sometimes I think you take some things for granted that everybody knows how to take a Tyco apart and put it back together, but had a question on how to put these things back together and not be frustrated with magnets falling out of the car, and in particular the pickup spring. So we're gonna do that and focus a lot maybe on putting a car back together that has some hop-ups. This is what I call my stage 4 Tyco chassis. It's got better traction magnets, a better front end set, and better rear tires. So with that, we'll start. And I generally start with a standard, out-of-the-box car. Take our back tires off because we're not going to need those. Take our front end set off. We're not going to need those. You got to kind of work on it and pop it out. Take the back axle out. We're going to save that for later. The pickup shoes you can just take and pull them off the front and let them fall down. They'll fall right off. Guide pin can stay in the car. This little heat shield, pull that out, throw that away, we don't need that. We're going to put a new motor in the car, so we need to pull the pinion off the car. So I'll take my tweezers and put in there and just pry that thing back off like that. So now we're ready to pop the motor box out of the chassis. And the best way to do that is hold the car in both hands and get your thumbs up on top and spread one side and then push down. You may have to get your fingernail involved and push down, push that motor box and rotate it out of the car. And now the traction magnets are left in. You can push those out. These get thrown away or reused or whatever else you want to do. Alright, so we now have the motor box in our hand, and we're going to take this apart because we're going to have to change motors out of it. So the white magnet on the Tyco goes on the left, so we'll just pull that out, set that down, get our motor magnet. We pull the pinion off so the rear bulkhead falls off, and then we've got the brushes inside the brush tubes that we have to salvage. We've taken the springs off. Now what I do to get those brushes out is I get a pair of nose pliers and grab and kind of use the bulkhead as a fulcrum and rotate that thing out. And now we have the motor and the bulkheads apart and the brushes out and the springs out and everything. So we will start to put this back together again and focus more on that, because that's really the more complicated part. I think anybody can yank one of these things apart. Is putting them back together again that gets to be a little problematic. Okay, one of the first things to do when you put a new motor back into a Tyco is you want to make sure that it's spaced properly. I see a lot of people that put a motor back into a Tyco and they really have it spaced either too loose or too tight. So what we do, we're going to dummy up the motor and the bulkhead and pop it back in the car without any magnets in it, and that will tell us how well the thing is spaced. So you kind of get it where the bulkheads are in the recesses of the chassis, and kind of pull it, spread it, and then you've got to seat the bulkheads in the recesses of the chassis. Kind of fight with it a little bit, but it will eventually go together. So there we go, we hear it snap in. Then a couple things, you can check the rotation, but more importantly what you want to do is check the fore and aft play. You can see the motor moving right there. You really don't want much more in play than that. If it gets too much more in play, then it affects the gear mesh. So I'm probably going to put a 15 thousandth spacer behind this, and we'll tighten that up. But a lot of people get it to where there's absolutely no play at all, and that's terrible, because then that's like a brake on the motor. You want some little bit of perceptible play, and you really need to take this extra step. Don't try to do everything in one. Don't load the magnets in, don't load the brushes in, don't do any of that. Do this here first, dummy this thing up, and check your fore-aft play, and fix that before you do your final assembly. So we'll get some spacers, and we'll put some spacers in that and see how that works. All right, we're going to pull this apart again. Pull the back bulkhead off. I'm going to guess that I'm going to need a 15 thousandths spacer, put that back on. Get that all situated. And sometimes you got to kind of massage the chassis around a little bit and make sure everything's seated up real good. And then that's about perfect right there. You can see just a little bit of fore-aft play. So we guessed right that a 15 thousandths spacer will work. So what we're going to do now is going ahead and then put the magnets back in the car, the motor brushes, and the springs, and concentrate on that. Okay, so let's put the motor box back together. Put one magnet on. Put another magnet on, put the white one on the left. Alright, now let's load the traction magnets into the chassis. Now I generally build all my cars in high downforce, so I check the face of the magnet to the side of the motor magnet. So in this particular case, the white one goes on the right, but that's only because I have marked them in low downforce. So these are level 8 traction magnets. Now these fit real tight in the chassis, so they tend to stay in. But if you're rebuilding a standard chassis with the standard factory magnets, they're very, very loose and they flop around. So once you get them in, a lot of times you have to take like an old front tire and stick in here like that. And that will hold those magnets in place while you load the motor box into the car. That's a little trick there that'll save you a lot of time if the traction magnets are too loose and don't want to hang in the car by themselves. Alright, so this is where the most complicated part comes in, getting the springs and brushes put in the car. And I have to use tweezers to load all this stuff up because my hands just don't have the dexterity. So once I get that brush barrel like that, and you got to be very careful when you seat this thing home that it's not crooked, or if that, you'll crack the motor brush. Alright, so one side's in. So you can see it's a little precarious. So you gotta have tweezers and or magnifiers or nimble fingers. If you don't have any of that, get yourself a magnifier, good set of tweezers, and then I use the end of my fingernail to kind of push that thing in. Alright, so we're really, really close, and a lot of things that hangs up, guys, at this point is getting these springs on. So we're going to lay one spring on one side, if we can get that on there. There we go. And then rotate around there, and I keep a finger on that so it doesn't flop off. And thread. Just thread the other one on. So you can see it may take you a little bit to... this one here is giving me a lot of problems. Yeah, there we go. And in the process, the other one fell off. So this is where a lot of people get hung up, including myself. Alright, so the springs are on, and you have to try to hold this motor box in such a way that these springs don't flop off. Get the springs set on the inside where they need to be, and there's some shoe keepers up here. Get the springs on that side there, and they'll stay put. And a lot of times when I grasp this, I try to kind of keep my fingers up when I get ready to load this to where these springs don't fall off. So you now have this motor box captive in your hand, about thusly so, and you're ready to kind of put this in. This is where you really got to kind of make sure it all goes in one fell swoop, because if you fiddle around too much, these springs will fall off. All right, so the traction magnets are loaded. Your motor box is ready to load. I'm right-handed, so I will put this motor box in this way first, lock it in this side, and then try to spread that side and push the rest of it in. And it tends to kind of go pretty quick. So I got it set in just like that. My springs are still in place. Grab this, pinch it, and then pull and snap it in just like that, real quick. And when you push it in like that, the pinion shaft will push the tire out, your magnets stay in place. So it's just that easy. The springs are in place, and then it's just a matter of some quick reassembly of the other parts, and then we'll have a pretty fast little car when we're done. Alright, so let's put our pickup shoes back on. And we got to make sure our springs are seated on the inside of the brush barrels. That's important that the springs are on the inside. So the pickup shoes are now on the chassis. We now have to get the springs, the shoe springs, underneath these little kick-ups. So you got to have tweezers. So I just grasp one, stick it under there like that, and that one's on. And find the other one, and that one's on. Now, one thing that I have is a 9-volt battery on the desk, and is really invaluable at this point. So we know the car basically runs. If we had a problem at this point, then there's no point in putting the rest of the car together and then have to pull everything apart just to fix because the motor's not running good, or some other problem. This pair of tweezers I can use for a number of different things. It can take the place of a more traditional pinion seating tool. In this particular application, I can just take and grab the end of the pinion and press it back on, and there we go. We're going to put an O-ring front axle set in it, and that goes in real easy. Pop some O-rings on it. So we still have the back axle to work with. We're getting kind of close to a running car. So let's take a look at fixing up our back axle. Alright, so we're going to reuse the back axle set to a point. We're going to get the factory hubs off of it, and we're going to put some Viper Machine Delrin 265 double flanged hubs on the back, and then some super tires. So I've got a hub puller, and there's a number of different hub pullers on the market, but essentially the concept's all the same. You just don't want to use pliers and a hammer. Alright, so there we have our axle salvaged, and then we are going to press our hubs on. In this particular case, we're going to use a Scale Engineering press. This particular press has a number of different sized collets that come with it. The basic press, I think, just has one universal, but you can upgrade it. But it's important to have a good press of some nature. you need something. You just can't hammer them back on, or you'll start ruining parts. So this particular size collet will hold that hub on straight while you're pushing it. And I'm not going to press it on all the way. I'm just going to quit there and turn it around and do the other side. Alright, so I'm going to get it kind of close. I'm not going to do it all in one. Now I want to pop this back in the car. And see where we are in terms of our spacing. Looks pretty good. There's a little extra space there that needs to be taken up, but also at this point I'll also run it on the 9-volt to make sure that it's you know, a good gear mesh. Now, one problem you may have with an original Tyco axles, they tend to be kind of short, and a lot of aftermarket hubs need a longer axle, so when you use these presses it may over push a hub and you have to go back and kind of pull it back out to where it needs to be. So we'll go on ahead and see what happens here, and yes, indeed it's going to over press that side. So let me take one quick look. Yeah, it'll be okay. Then I'll press in this other side. Yeah, so as you can see, it's pretty tight. So what we're going to do now is go back and pull the hub back out where it needs to be. All right, a little bit on that side. A little bit on that side. So that's more where it needs to be. You can see the space right down in here. And that's a pretty good judge. Alright, so we're nearly home with a complete car. So the only thing we have left to do is the tires. Now, the super tire that I use is made for a Tyco wide rim. Alright, but on these single flange rims, the rims are a little narrower and the tires tend to kind of stick out a little too much. If it doesn't bother you, run it, but what I like to do is trim this tire down some. So we're going to take a look at how to do that. Alright, so there's a couple little basic things to trimming tires. One thing that I do is I get an old big wide rim on an axle, make sure it's all pressed on good, and I use a battery powered Dremel that tends to turn at low speed, and it has an adjustable chuck on it, and I will chuck that thing up. I'll turn it on and make sure it's running smooth. I'll mount the tire backward on that hub, and then you got to make sure that you turn it on and run it and look at it and make sure it's not wobbling. Now this is the next step that's kind of crucial. You got to have a nice sharp X-Acto knife and put a little bit of oil on the blade. It's important you put oil on the blade. If you don't oil the blade will hang up and the tire will grab and you won't make a clean cut. Now this is a judgmental issue, and it's something that you kind of look at it and you do it real quick and you've got a neatly trimmed tire. So we'll turn it on. Just that quick. And we now have a narrow tire. Mount up the next one. Put a little oil on our blade. Just that quick. And we now have narrow tires. So, there we are. This is a 3.5 Tyco with level 8 traction magnets, a Viper Razor O-ring front set, a Viper rear single flanged hubs on the back, and for the most part stock electrics. One thing that I want to note here is a lot of guys try to they think by putting powerful or thicker motor brush springs in that the car will run better. That's not always the case. I mean, I think these factory springs are about 0.006, and you start putting 8s or 9s in there and it almost acts like a disc brake, and the cars really don't run very well. So if you don't have the factory springs, Wizard I think makes a 0.006 high temperature spring that's pretty good. Their motor brushes are the standard replacement, I think, for the Tyco. They're pretty good. They're 80% copper. So a couple of those little things may help it run slightly better. You can run a ski shoe on the car, but that requires some tweaking to get them to ride perfectly flat. The original Tyco shoes are slightly curved in this area, so if these things were formed a little bit out of shape, the shoes will always contact, and the cars generally will always run. So there we go. Any questions, you all can send me messages and we'll try to answer those, but thank you for joining us.